Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's Maze MTG here with another deck tech video. Before we do get started with today's video, there's just a couple of things I'd like to say. If you do want to skip those couple of things, it's just some thank yous and some announcements. There's a link to a timestamp for the deck tech in the video below, and also a link to the timestamp for the games beginning with the deck. So first things first though, I do want to say a very big thank you to everyone who has viewed any of the videos on my channel in the short period of time since I started recording what I was doing in terms of Magic content. We've reached 1,000 views now, and while that may not sound like many, it's certainly not as many as some people get on their video within the first 24 hours of it being posted. It means a lot to me. It lets me know that people are watching what I'm doing, hopefully that they're enjoying what I'm doing, and I should be looking to do this for a while to come. Second thing, just like to announce, I've got my qualification through for the Red Bull Untapped tournament. So I'm playing the Arena Qualifier on the 30th of June, so I'm hoping to live stream that, and I'll also then be putting the videos on demand on Twitch as well, whether or not I do well or poorly. So thank you for bearing with me while I said those things, but now let's get on to the deck tech. So, today's deck, it's a deck from GP Taipei's top 8. It's Teruya Kakumae'S 3rd place Boros Feather list. The only copy of Boros Feather to make it into day 2. Teruya converted it into a top 8 finish. So, what's going on with this deck? Well, first things first, it is a deck for traditional standard, best of 3 in this configuration, although I'm sure you could take a variation of it into arena standard, best of 1. So, the deck's called Boros Feather. It's named after Feather the Redeemed. Feather's a 3/4 flyer for 3 mana, which is a fantastic rate in its own right, but also whenever you target Feather with an instant or sorcery spell, instead of putting that spell into your graveyard as it resolves, it goes into exile, and you get it back into your hand at the beginning of the next end step. So when you start targeting Feather with things like Defiant Strike, Sheltering Light, Reckless Rage, you will be able to get all of these cards back into your hand at the beginning of the end step, so you can get multiple uses out of those cards during a turn cycle. For something like Defiant Strike, it turns into a card drawing engine. The rest of the creatures in the deck facilitate kind of an aggressive slant, so you have 4 Adanto Vanguard. It's a 3/1 on the attack. You can make it indestructible by paying life. It's a good recipient for tricks to push through damage because you're not afraid that the Vanguard is going to get killed and you're going to suffer a 2/1 as a result of that. The deck's playing a single Dire Fleet Daredevil. It is a 2/1 first striker, but more importantly, when it comes into play, you can cast an instant or sorcery card from an opponent's graveyard by paying effectively the converted mana cost of that spell in colorless mana. So you can snipe things like Thought Erasures, fire them back at Esper players, anything that might be useful to a particular situation. The deck's still playing 8 more 2-drops in addition to the Vanguards and the Daredevils, so we have 4 Dreadhorde Arcanist. This card's found its way into a variety of formats. It's seen play in Vintage, in Legacy, here in Standard as well. So it's a 1/3 trample for 2 mana, might look fantastic at first glance, but when it attacks, you can cast an instant or sorcery card with converted mana cost less than or equal to its power from your graveyard for free. So when Dreadhorde Arcanist attacks, you can flash back things like Shock, Reckless Rage, Defiant Strike for free, and Defiant Strike, if it pumps Dreadhorde Arcanist power to 2, maybe there's something else you can get, not in the main deck, but again, it's something that's available to you as an option. The last 2-drop is 10th District Legionnaire. It's kind of a standard spin on a design Wizards has done quite a lot, where you get your 2/2 for 2, it has a keyword, in this case haste, and whenever you target 10th District Legionnaire with a spell, it gets a +1/+1 counter, and you get to scry 1. So it's a good recipient for your instants and sorceries if you don't have a feather to target with them. And being able to scry fixes your draws, helps to avoid flood in a deck whose curve is very low, very aggressive. The last non-creature spell, aside from Planeswalkers that we haven't touched on yet, is Shock. While you're not going to be really shocking your feathers, Shock is just a efficient removal spell. You can cast it off Dreadhorde Arcanist to kill opposing creatures. It acts as reach in terms of throwing it at the opposing player's face. And one day I will be able to say Dreadhorde Arcanist without fumbling it. But apparently it won't be this day. In terms of the last creature in the deck, we have 3 copies of Legion Warboss. Familiar card for people who play Standard. It's a sideboard staple in certain decks. It's main deck in the Gruul decks. It's a 2/2 for 3 with Mentor. At the beginning of combat in your turn, it makes a 1/1 red goblin with haste that has to attack the turn it comes in. But then in following turns, if the Warboss gets to attack alongside some 1/1s, you get to Mentor onto them. If your opponent has no creatures, it creates a clock very quickly. It's a very powerful threat against opposing planeswalkers. If an opponent plays a Teferi, minus is their Teferi, it's sat on 1 loyalty. Your 1/1 red goblin can come in, strike that Teferi, put that Teferi into the graveyard. The remaining non-land cards in the deck, you've got 2 Gideon Blackblade, effectively a 4/4 creature when it's attacking, and it gives your other creatures your choice of keywords. That could be indestructible, that could be lifelink, could be vigilance depending on the situation. So the +1's very flexible there, and if he does get to -6, Gideon also acts as removal, exiling problematic permanents. And then finally in the main deck, you've got 1 copy of Ajani, Adversary of Tyrants, the only spell in the deck that costs more than 3 mana. The +1 allows you to distribute counters, making more of your creatures into threats. The -2 can recur things like 10th District Legionnaire, your Arcanists, your Vanguards, your Daredevils, bringing them back into play so you have something to put counters on and cast your targeting spells onto. And the -7 is on Ajani. Don't know how likely it is that you're going to achieve it with this deck, but as ever, it's an ultimate that can close the game out very quickly. In terms of mana base, this deck is playing 22 lands, so 8 basic plains, 6 mountains, and then 4 shocks, 4 checks. It's a 2-color deck, but we don't want to be playing anything like Evolving Wilds like Boros Guildgate. You want your lands to come in untapped because you are an aggressive deck. Perfect. So, as I said, this is a deck for traditional standard, best of 3, so the deck does also have a sideboard. 15 cards, obviously, starting with 1 copy of Demystify. It's a 1-mana spell that allows you to destroy enchantments, so it's something you can recast with Dreadhorde Arcanist, and you can break enchantments like Search for Azcantors, like Conclave Tribunals, like Prison Realms. So it's a very flexible card, but you only really need the 1. 3 Tocatli Honor Guard. This comes in against decks that are playing the Wildgrowth Walker, Jaylight Ranger, Murfolk Branchwalker package. Shutting down those abilities is exceedingly powerful. Also turns off Hostage Takers, abilities like that. Very strong on a 1/3, doesn't affect our deck particularly. You probably do cut Direfleet Daredevil if you're bringing in Honor Guard though. If you want more Daredevils against decks like Esper, you've got them in the sideboard, you can bring these in. Like I said, it allows you to cast opposing Thought Erasures back at the player. If they have Raska's Contempts, they have targets against the Esper player. It's a very powerful effect to have on a creature, and again, mitigates some degree of flood with the deck as well. 2 Lava Coil. Rekindling Phoenix is a problem. It blocks Feather incredibly well. We don't really have many ways to push through it, other than, say, Sheltering Light in combat shock, or a Gideon that's got to 6 loyalty to exile it. So 2 Lava Coil allow you to answer Rekindling Phoenixes cleanly, as well as just acting as a removal spell as well for things like Tempest Djinns with 4 toughness. Prison Realm is another flexible removal spell, allows you to get Planeswalkers as well, and Scry 1. The reason we're playing Prison Realm over some other options, presumably, is because it does cost 3, so it's slightly lower in the curve as well, although you'll see in a moment we do also have access to 2 copies of Ixalan's Binding, which take permanents and keep them locked out for the rest of the game. So again, a powerful answer to things like Teferis, things like Big Teferi, just problematic permanents that you don't want the opponent to play another copy of. So again, fantastic answer to Rekindling Phoenix. And then lastly, if you want to be able to grind, you want to be able to go over the top of other aggressive decks, there's 2 more copies of Ajani in the sideboard. So again, you get to distribute counters to diversify your threats to increase the overall strength of your board position, and also -2 to recur creatures that may have been removed early in the game. Again, contributing to that slightly grindier plan of just having a constant stream of threats to pressure your opponent with in conjunction with your targeting combat tricks. Because the last thing you want is a handful of Sheltering Lights, Reckless Rages, Defiant Strikes, and nothing to target with them because the opponent's been 1-for-1ing you for the majority of the game. Cool. So that's just a look at the cards that are in the deck. I can't claim to have any high-level insights into the deck, but it does seem like a very fun list, and the power level is undeniable. It did, like I said, top 8 at GP as the only copy of the deck to make it into Day 2. So what do you think of Red, White, Feather? At this point, let me know if you have any opinions on the deck, if you've tried the deck out, how you found it in the comments below. But otherwise, what we're going to do now is get into some games with the deck. Okay, so we found our first opponent with Red White Feather. As this is a deck for traditional standard, we are playing traditional standard matches. However, to keep this video short and allow you to see a variety of opponents, we are just going to show a couple of game ones. And we are on the play in this game one. This is an interesting hand. We have 2 copies of Reckless Rage. We have a Dreadhorde Arcanist, which does have the 3 toughness to allow us to utilize them, and a Legion Warboss, which we can cast on curve. So I don't think we can send this back. We don't have a Feather, unfortunately, but we can't have all things all the time. Opponent appears to also be keeping their 7. So we'll lead on a mountain and pass. None of our spells are castable because Reckless Rage requires a target on our side of the battlefield as well. And opponent has played Hallowed Fountain tapped. So I'm hoping that's going to indicate something like Bant Ramp as opposed to playing a control deck. But we'll lead on Dreadhorde Arcanist. There's no reason to kind of leave Sheltering Light up here, I don't think. Opponent plays a Godless Shrine tapped, so that very much suggests to me that we are playing against Esper. So what does Sheltering Light grant? Indestructible Scry 1. So Sheltering Light's a good card to have access to, assuming opponent is going to play targeted removal. If opponent has Cry of the Carnarium, I suppose it would only kill our Legion Warboss anyway this turn. So I think what we're going to do is just make Warboss, create a Goblin, and get in for 2. Because if opponent doesn't have Cry of the Carnarium, and they just have an answer to the Warboss, we still have 2 creatures that are attacking. Opponent does have a 3rd land. Militia Bugler. That's unexpected. Okay then. So on our turn, we're going to be Reckless Raging the Bugler, targeting Arcanist, puts it in the graveyard for us to potentially Arcanist on future turns. But it also means, more importantly, that Warboss gets to attack and one of our goblins gets mentored onto. The fact that our opponent's playing Militia Bugler makes me think they might be on a more Esper mid-range sort of deck. Like maybe Heroes, Buglers, Thief of Sanity, Bellhaunts. Well, they hit Diligent Excavator. That's interesting. That is very interesting. So we drew a 10th District Legionnaire, which was a good draw there. So that's actually going to be our target for this Reckless Rage. Because of the way the effects stack, the Legionnaire ends up as a 3/3 before the Reckless Rage would do 2 damage to it. I don't think we do want to spew off this Sheltering Light, though, so we'll just play Legionnaire. We'll Reckless Rage now. Target the creature I don't control, and my Legionnaire. We're not wrong. There's another Sheltering Light on top, which I'd actually quite like to leave there. So opponent does explode to that. We had quite the commanding board position there. So we're going into game 2, but I'm going to pause the recording there, and I'll see you for another game against another deck. Okay, so we're ready with an opponent for our second match. If you want to know what happened in the last match, it turned out our opponent was on the Esper Rona deck, the Rona combo deck with Teshar. In game 2, we got an early Tocatli on a Guardian to play out of the sideboard, and that was kind of all she wrote in terms of the game. Feather did come out to play, which was pretty nice. But in terms of this game, what do we have in our opening hand? So we have a Shock, a Vanguard, Defiant Strike, and more lands than we probably need. Defiant Strike does let us draw a card, so I don't think I want to mulligan. Although that might be a poor decision. We'll keep and see what happens. We have draws. We have plenty of draws we can draw to, obviously, but let's see. Opponent mulligan to 6 and bottomed. That's a good start. So this Elves is getting shocked. We draw land, which isn't ideal. But we'll see what happens from here. If we draw, say, just like Feather or something, we're in a pretty okay spot, you'd assume. Opponent plays a tap Breeding Pool. Ajani I'll take. We're going to play Vanguard. And we will pass. If we don't draw anything, we're definitely going to be Defiant Striking to draw another card, see if we can hit a creature to deploy before we cast our Ajani. But opponent's doing nothing also, which is reassuring. So we draw a 10th District Legionnaire. That was a pretty good hit, to be perfectly honest. We're going to play Retreat. We're going to make Legionnaire. We're going to get into combat. And we are going to attack with both. I'm going to Defiant Strike the Legionnaire because this pushes through 2 damage. And currently our plan for next turn is to cast Ajani. We don't need a Plains on the Scry. We'd like to just draw more spells. We do draw a Sheltering Light, which was a fantastic draw. I'm not worried about leaving it up next turn because Adanto Vanguard we can still pay life to give it indestructible. Opponent has no plays again, which is interesting. So now we have options. We can either... they could have Frilled Mystic here, actually. Opponent probably has Frilled Mystic. They're not just passing with nothing up. So in that case, I think what we just do is attack in with both our creatures. Because if opponent does have Frilled Mystic, we don't want them to be able to block with it and counter a spell. And if they flash it in to try and block the Legionnaire, we probably are going to Sheltering Light this turn and then play Adanto Vanguard. So opponent's just taking it. So we currently have lethal on board between these two creatures and Sheltering Lighting one of them. So what I think we're going to do is just put this Foundry into play tapped. So next turn we have the option of Ajani plus Sheltering Light, and we're going to pass. An opponent can decide if they want to put their Mystic in as a 3-2, which I don't... well, apparently they didn't want to. And if they didn't have a Mystic there, I mean, we're not really losing much from giving them that turn cycle off. So here, we're going to untap, draw a card like I said. We're going to go to combat and attack. If opponent passes through blocks, we're just going to Sheltering Light our Legionnaire and try to kill them. So here's our attackers. So opponent, if they are blocking, has to flash Mystic in now. And they're not. So this is where we Sheltering Light the Legionnaire. Even if they have the Mystic at this point, it doesn't stop us winning the game because we're at damage. So this is just 7 damage coming through. Yep, Mystic resolves. So we're not going to make an indestructible Legionnaire, but we should, if I played this correctly, be past blocks. And the opponent's taking 7. And we are. So that's game. Another game, very short game with Feather, but another interesting one actually. If we jammed Ajani on turn 4, that could have gone a lot worse for us, a lot worse than it did. So those are a couple of games with the Feather deck. We are 2-0, well, at least in the games that you've seen. As I said, we did win the match against the Rona combo deck as well. But don't take my word for it. Take Teruya Kakumae'S result of the GP, making top 8, coming third with the red-white Feather deck as the only copy of the Feather deck in day 2. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know in the comments below. If you didn't, please let me know in the comments below as well. I'd like to know what I can do to potentially improve. Otherwise, if you'd like to see more of this content, please select subscribe. And if you'd like to watch more content live, you can find it linked below as well. There's a link to my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/MazeMTG. But however you choose to interact with this video, I hope you have a fantastic day. And once again, thank you so much for being part of the 1,000 first views on this channel. Thanks.